Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the Ethical Muslim Leadership New Directions Through Turbulence Theory with Dr. Kaiser Abdullah. Dr. Kaiser Abdullah is an assistant professor in the Adult and Organizational Communication program in the Department of Policy, Organizational and Leadership Studies in the College of Education at the Temple University. He teaches undergraduate courses on leadership and communication, research methods, organizational communication, conflict and classroom management, and field practicum. He also teaches a graduate course on innovation technology and teaching higher education in the College of Education. Kaiser is also the president of Satera Coaching and Leadership Counseling, LLC. Satera is a private company that focuses on leadership training, conflict resolution, professional and conflict coaching, and organizational development. Kaiser is a certified conflict resolution in education trainer, professional coach, positive discipline educator, and a trained mediator and conflict coach. Kaiser's research interests center around leadership, organizational development, and identity and conflict. His chapter, Dana Abdullah, Exemplar of Community Leadership, was published in Democratic Ethical Educational Leadership, Reclaiming School Reform in 2015 in Routledge. He has a number of published interviews on the topic of religion and identity in public spaces in various news media. Kaiser is the recipient of the Outstanding Instructor Award in 2008 for his teaching in the College of Science and Technology. He also has received the Captain Eileen Bradley Award in 2010 for student development. He is a faculty advisor for the Muslim Student Association and the Practitioners of Organizational Development Society at Temple. He is a board member of the Interfaith Center of Greater Philadelphia and the Good Shepherd Mediation Program, serves as a police chaplain for the 18th District in Philadelphia, and currently is the COO, interim director of the board and imam at Huba Institute, a 60-year-old nonprofit religious organization in Philadelphia. So without further ado, Dr. Kaiser Abdullah.
Some reason it's acting up. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. For some reason, it's doing this flashing thing where it's no longer showing up on the projection screen. So it's flashing here. So one of the most uncomfortable things, right, is to stand while they read your bio. It's like, okay, I know I didn't send something that was that long for you guys to read out, right? So at the end of it, as I'm listening to all of these things that they are saying, I'm having this out-of-body experience. I'm like, no, that is not that guy you all are speaking about, because what I'm about to say now doesn't sound anything like what you just read from that screen. So I do apologize for this, and I just unplugged it and plugged it back in. We had it up a second ago, but for whatever reason now, it has stopped showing. So you'll just have my less than handsome countenance to look at throughout this presentation. And I would, if you are able to address that for me, I'd be greatly appreciated. And I know they mentioned that I work with technology. This is when you don't like that title, right? When the technology doesn't work. But let me jump right into it. Yeah, I don't know what's going on. So I want to jump right into it and start discussing what this whole presentation is about. In terms of thinking about ethical leadership, one of the things that I want to do is to define what leadership is in this very particular context today. And if anybody wants a copy of this presentation afterwards, I can easily share it with you. So I do apologize that it's not up there, but I'll easily share it with you after the presentation. So I'm speaking about leadership specifically in the context of imams, right? This is the focus of this presentation today, specifically in the context of imams. And what I want to do is just offer a very broad idea of what a definition of leadership is. One is socially defined, meaning that we determine what leadership is, right? A group or the collective determines what leadership is and who a leader is. A leader inspires others. whatever we determine that inspiration to be, however we want to define inspiration, a leader inspires others to do something, whether good or bad. So when I'm teaching my class on leadership, I always ask my students, so I picked the worst leader in history, right? Like one of the most terrible leaders, right? Like Idi Amin or Hitler, right? Were they good leaders, or were they successful leaders? And of course, my students are like, no, they're not. Right? They're not successful leaders. And I'm like, were they able to inspire people to move towards a vision, to do something? Yeah, they were, right? So they're effective leaders. Being good or ethical leaders is a very different thing. So that is the context in which I'm speaking about today. How do we develop ethical leaders? So leaders inspire people towards a common goal. They have a common vision. It's a collaborative effort, right? It's a collaborative effort, meaning that leaders get people to work together towards a certain goal. And most importantly, the engagement is principled. So whatever principles they are working with, whatever values they are working with, it's principled engagement. And anytime Dr. Naim walks into the room, I have to be very careful with my word choice now. So when we speak, as I mentioned, I'm really focusing on religious leaders in terms of imams. And we know within the African-American context, or the African-American community, when you think of a imam, right, he's not simply the person who comes and leads the prayer, right? And generally, normative in the African-American Muslim community, the imam is not somebody who just comes, leads a prayer, and gives a class here and there. The imam is a religious leader. He is a social leader. He's the administrative leader. He is the political leader. He's all of the leaders. He's everything embodied into that one person. Fair enough? Right? Can we agree on that as the normative idea of who the African-American Muslim leader, Muslim imam is? Right? He has all of these qualities. So he's expected to know finance. He's expected to know how to manage relationships. He's expected to know how to lead all of the prayers and give the lectures. He's expected to know how to engage actively in political discourse. He's expected to be Sister Ilhan, State Representative Ilhan. He's expected to be a Malcolm X. He's expected to be Dr. Martin Luther King. He's expected all of these things in this one individual. So we place a lot on our African-American imams when it comes to leading a community. So let's understand Black American Muslim leadership. I want to go with a very quick historical review of what this looks like for us. In terms of where it started off, we know that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was the first centralized leader for the Muslim community, right? He was given the direction from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He had the political energy, he had the political capital, as well as he had the social capital within the space, right? He may not have had it in Mecca, but once he migrated to Medina, he had the social capital inside of Medina. After the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, you have the righteous guided caliphs, right? The Khalifa Rashidun. You have the 4 rightly guided caliphs. And then after that, you had the dynasties. So you had the Umayyad, the Abbasid, and you had all of these dynasties. Around this time, I want to put something into context. It is around the time of the caliphates, or the dynasties, I should say, when Hadith literature became the source of connection to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So think of Islam going global, right? Think of Islam dispersing from Arabia. Now you have many other communities embracing Islam, and what people needed, they needed to find a way to connect themselves back to Muhammad. Prior to that, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam.
I had a quick question.
Sure.
For the crowd, if you got some spaces between you, can you, there's people like sitting on the floor. We're trying to get more chairs, but trying to either scoot in or more effectively move around so that we can, there's people back around sitting on the floor. Thank you so much. Sorry.
That's all right. That's all right. For you, we can definitely do that. So just around the time of the dynasties, I think this is where I was. Just around the time of the dynasties, just around the time of the dynasties is when people started to actually rely on hadith to connect themselves with Islam or connect themselves with the Prophet, peace be upon him. Because up until that time, someone could just speak, and because they had a certain connection with the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, they didn't have to say, okay, on the authority of this one, narrated by this one, narrated by this. So hadith literature, as we understand it now, didn't start up as it is until centuries after the death of the Prophet, peace be upon him. And one of the arguments that I want to bring is this reliance on hadith literature is what has caused a certain disconnect in the Muslim community today. So don't hit me with anything just yet, right? I'm not saying that we don't accept hadith, right? I'm not going the route of saying that the only thing valid is Quran. That is not what I'm saying at all. What I am arguing is that the reliance on hadith literature as our main connection back to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was one of the starting points where there became a crisis in leadership. And by the end of this session, I hope I can tease that out for you. So let's fast forward a few centuries, right? You have the rise of the charismatic leader, particularly in the African-American Muslim community. So it's not that the Muslim in the African-American Muslim community wasn't intelligent, very articulate, but rose to a position of power based on charisma for the most part, right? And this is well documented. Amir al-Islam, Dr. Shimon Jackson, all of them have documented this in various ways, right? They rose to positions through charisma. It is also well documented that many of the ones who became leaders in Sunni tradition post the civil rights era were because they were strong in the civil rights era, right? So people who were strong in the civil rights era and then became Muslim, they also emerged as strong leaders in the Muslim community post, quote unquote, civil rights era proper, right? And it's also well documented that out of the fruit of Islam, so think of the FOI being somewhat dismantled around the 1970s, mid-1970s to late 1970s, right? That many of them who were captains and leaders in the fruit of Islam, not Nation of Islam, the fruit of Islam, that they became leaders in some of the Sunni communities, early Sunni communities in Philadelphia and other parts of the United States. So you have coming out of these areas individuals who had very strong roots in social reform, very strong roots in civil rights, coming into leading the Muslim community. But again, based on, to a certain extent, charisma for the most part. And they work in the community, not to minimize that. Then there was a pushback. So you started to have more of a pushback as to, okay, we need to have people who have what, quote unquote, traditional knowledge leading our communities. So then think around the 70s, 80s, and 90s, you had this large movement of Muslims, indigenous Muslims, leaving the West and going to the East to study, right? To get the traditional knowledge to then bring back to the community. Because it was this pushback against what we consider to be people who didn't have a connection to the classical Muslim knowledge. All of this played a role in how African-American Muslim leadership started to be viewed. Because within our communities, one of the things that we can accept or admit is that individuals who came from the East, and when I say came from the East, I'm going to make a very broad stroke with a broad brush, right? Think of subcontinent India, India, Pakistan, and any country in the Middle East. If they came from any of those areas, we gave them way more Islamic capital than they may have deserved. No slight on anyone who is not black in the audience right now. Right? And there's a theory about this, right? There's this theory called cultural capital. And the ones who are closest to the origins of, because we cannot divorce Islam from Arab culture. We won't be able to do it. As much as we try, we can't do it. Right? So I want to put that on the table right now. As black Muslims, we'll never divorce Islam from Arab culture. So let's forget that now. Right? Arabic is very much part of Islam. Language is part of the culture. We'll have the influences of it. If you continue to do the aqiqah, if you continue to make hajj, if you continue to do any of the things, give gifts, all of these things are part of Arab culture and Arab tradition. So we can't divorce Islam from certain aspects of Arab culture. So what we have taken place is people who are closest to what we would call the cultural center of Islam at that point in time, when they came, we gave them a lot of Islamic capital. So if they said something, we took it hook, line, and sinker. If they said, well, this is how the Prophet did it, then that's how the Prophet did it. Why? Because in our minds, they looked like the Prophet or sounded like the Prophet, although we have no images of the Prophet and stuff like that, right? But in our minds, they looked like the Prophet and sounded like the Prophet to us. And worse yet, if they throw in a couple Arabic words, we are swooning. Okay, enough? I don't want to make light of this because we have to understand that they grew up in a very different cultural context. They would have grown up hearing Muslim stories. They would have grown up hearing Islamic practices. They would have grown up hearing things because that is part of their cultural reality. We did not grow up with that. So whereas they may have had this innate understanding to a certain extent of certain nascent Muslim practices, we wouldn't have that because for us, we had to go out and learn it around that time. So what became a norm for them, or what was a norm for them, was not a norm for us. So part of the struggle when Muslims went over, when African American Muslims went over to study, and when they came back, we wanted to see them resemble more of the ones we held in high esteem, right? The ones who were closer connected to the Prophet, peace be upon him, based on our understanding of what closeness to the Prophet is. And again, historically, closeness to the Prophet became how much I match the hadith that I'm hearing about the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is what closeness to the Prophet represented for most of us. So Boullier argues in his text in 1994, he says that the crisis in leadership emerged as Muslims attempted to create, a homogeneous corpus of laws, values to lead and develop a growing heterogeneous Muslim community. So this is sort of like codifying what I've been saying here, that there was an attempt to create this one body of law, hadith literature, right? So that we can all practice alike, look alike, and appear alike in our engagement with Islam. How many of you in this room, you have asked an imam for advice about something that had nothing to do with Islam? Like you've gone to an imam for advice that had nothing to do with Islam. Just by a show of hands once more, just let's see. All right, good. How many of you have gone to a doctor to ask about law? I am going to tease out this point a bit more. It goes back to where I started off. That the imam, because we have, and other researchers have argued this, because there has been this historical understanding that leadership, and Dr. Jackson spoke about this, that leadership is tied to religious knowledge. We turn to our religious leaders for advice on any and everything. Things that in many cases, they are not equipped to respond to. And I didn't use the word qualified. I know that's a red pill word, all right? They are not equipped to respond to. But being quote unquote compassionate, they respond to it. And that has caused some problems. And we are going to get to that in a second. So indicators of the current crisis. So this crisis that started off with this reliance on, or this attempt to create one body of law or one body of doctrine to dictate how all Muslims function, has pushed us to this idea that we need to all look alike and all be alike and all function alike. And if somebody isn't functioning the way we are functioning, then they are not honored, they're not Islam, they're not Muslim, they're not this, they're not. So we have all of the different terms for them that I'm not going to get into today. So authenticity was either rooted in family ties to the Prophet, peace be upon him, or in intellectual ties, meaning understanding of his life through the hadith. The indicators of the current crisis, and I wish you could see this image that I have on the screen right now. The indicators of the current crisis with the imam at the center of it. I have about 6 things here being identified. And of these indicators of the current crisis, what I want to identify is the first one, low practitioner support. What do I mean by that? How many imams? So give me a profession, anyone in the room. Give me your profession. Tell me, just blurt out a profession for me. Any profession. Touché. Well played. Well played. Well played. Teacher. Good. Funny guy, right? So teacher. Is there an association for teachers? Are there many associations for teachers, right? Do teachers sometimes get together to discuss things related to education and student development? Do we have conferences for teachers? Do we have books for teachers? Do we have professional development for teachers? We have all of these things for teachers. Is an imam a practitioner, like a teacher is a practitioner? Yes. A lot of the things that I just mentioned that you have for teachers, you have for doctors, you have for lawyers, you have for all of these other professions, you don't have it for imams. There is low practitioner support for the African American imam. There have been attempts to have quote-unquote shura councils, but if you've ever been on one of those, you know how those things go. You know those things flow. The second element of crisis is intellectual dissonance. I'm treading lightly on some of these things here. How many of you have been to a lecture, a khutbah, or anything like that, and you're like, this imam is talking about something. You know where I'm going with this, right? He's talking about something from 50 years ago that I can't even relate to right now. He's still talking about Darul Kufr and Darul Harb, right? The land of Kufr and the land of Islam. He's still talking about these things, and that is not my reality right now. So there's an intellectual dissonance between the community and the imam. In other cases, there is a socio-cultural dissonance between the imam and the community. Imam goes overseas, he studies, he comes back. Let me not be facetious. He goes overseas, he comes back, and the way he's speaking, it's almost as though he doesn't remember where he came from. The cultural reality that he's sharing is completely divorced from the reality that he's speaking to. So there is a social dissonance between him and the community. Another element of the crisis. Yet another element of the crisis is alienation from political engagement. A number of our imams aren't engaged politically. They don't know how to engage politically, or democracy is not of the sunnah, or voting is haram, or any of these other things that we have heard for our entire lives. And I know some communities aren't faced with that, but there are some communities that still struggle with that. Youth staying away from the community. There are youth who have no desire to be part of the Muslim community anymore. Right? It's like they come to Jummah because they know that that's the last thing that they can hold on to. You will never see them in the community outside of Jummah and Eid. Fair enough? Is that a crisis? Is that an element of a crisis? Yes, it is. And last but not least, this desire for uniformity. We do not all have to practice the same way or even pray in the same space for us to be connected. But there has been this push, and it's a malaise, it's something that's a characteristic of people who trace their identity back to a founding leader, or who trace their identity back to a religious structure, that feel that this structure should not change and it should be consistent over time. And if that thing should never change and should be consistent over time, for it to be authentic, it means that we all should be doing it the same way. And this has caused a major problem. Because if you go into a space and they're not doing it how you expect them to do it, you may never go back to that space again. That's a major problem. So all of these things are things that have led to this idea of a crisis, or these are not have led, but these are things that I highlight, just some of the things I highlight to show that there is a crisis in Muslim leadership presently. So if the presence of these indicators in the African American community are in fact there, then it requires a new way of us thinking about how to develop Muslim leaders for our reality. And this is the crux of this conversation. How do we go about developing Muslim leaders for our community? I want to situate this in something called turbulence theory. And turbulence theory argues that when there is, you've traveled on a plane, you know what turbulence is, right? Start shaking up on the plane, right? When turbulence happens, it requires that you, when you're on a plane and they hit a pocket and they hit a turbulent pocket, what do they tell you to do? Fasten your seatbelts, right? So anytime you hit turbulence, pay attention, it could get a little rough. Turbulence theory, when it comes to development of Muslim leadership, is what I want to ground this in. That right now, we are not at a state of light, moderate, or even severe turbulence. We're at a state of extreme turbulence, which is the fourth level. We're at a state of extreme turbulence. And when it comes to a state of extreme turbulence, and I'm not being alarmist here, when it comes to a state of extreme turbulence, it doesn't just require that we buckle our seatbelts and we hold on for a rough ride. It requires that we rethink how we do things. It requires that we look critically as how things have been done and possibly change that thing completely. This is what severe turbulence, extreme turbulence requires. That we look at the system in which we function and consider overhauling that system in a very critical way. We need to do that because to a certain extent, the African American Muslim leadership is in a state of extreme turbulence. It's a state of crisis. Some quick causes of this turbulence. So I mentioned earlier on some of the examples of the crisis, some quick causes of the turbulence. I'll use a popular one. It was mentioned in the previous room as well, 9/11, right? 9/11 is a cause of that turbulence. And for many of us, we may say, well, no, we existed really well. 9/11, it doesn't affect the African American Muslim. It really is more the immigrant Muslim community. If we say that, we are sadly mistaken. Right? We are sadly mistaken. And if we are defining and usually when we define the immigrant Muslim community, we are usually speaking about subcontinent India, India, Pakistan, that area, Southeast Asia, or the Arab world. We generally include Africa as part of the immigrant Muslim community, right? We like to claim them to a certain extent as Black Muslims, right? We claim the Africans as Black Muslims from various parts of the continent of Africa. But 9/11 has caused severe turbulence in our system. You have a number of cases of Muslims, Black, being attacked simply because of how they look. Whether we want to put the origin of this on a different community or not, is being significantly impacted by it. You had the sister in Minnesota who was speaking Swahili in the cafe, and another lady, I was listening to NPR coming up, and that's why it's fresh in my mind, right? And another lady smacked a glass across her face. because she was speaking Swahili and because she looked like a Muslim. So we have this as something that is causing significant turbulence in our community. The whole Takfiri movement as another cause of turbulence. I have seen a number of black the indigenous Muslim community, African American Muslim community, and the immigrant Muslim community who don't identify as black. But everything that has been done to address that, I would argue, has been superficial and will fail until racism as an issue. There is no way that I have a grievance against you, whether real or imagined, and you come to me and we speak about, hey, you know what, we need to create a soup kitchen in Philadelphia. And I sit down and come to meetings with you week after week and never address that burning issue or that quote unquote elephant in the room. Most groups fall apart because at some point in time, that elephant for so long, right? It's a big animal, right? You can only hide it for so long. It is going to come up. And I can speak of it from experience with this because I've been part of groups that have tried to do this, but the racism issue has never been fully addressed because to a certain extent, we're afraid to do it. We are afraid to address it because at the end of the day, we are all brothers and sisters in a sense. Addressing the crisis in Muslim leadership. Leadership, just like our Islam brothers and sisters, is all about decision making. Leadership, just like our Islam, is all about decision making. This is the basis of leadership. And at the end of the day, what we want our leaders to do is to make ethical decisions. Because anytime you disagree with a leader, it's because they have made a decision that you have seen to be unethical on some level. Right? Ethical decision making is a thing that we need to move towards. And there has to be a change in how we develop leaders, meaning that the change has to be focused on creating compassionate and ethical leaders as opposed to knowledgeable leaders. We have knowledge. Look around the United States, knowledge is there. What we have a challenge with, compassion. Usually, sometimes when I give a khutbah, I give this example of, there's a sister who, she was walking by, and this is a real story that a sister told to me once. She was walking by, and there was some ice on the ground, and she slipped, and she fell on the ice. And there were some brothers around her, and the brothers, because according to the ethics of Islam, a man cannot touch a woman to whom he's not married. I'll let you sit with that for a second. We don't have a problem of knowledge. We have a problem of ethical decision making. A compassionate leader is an ethical leader, and an ethical leader is a compassionate leader. And in a second, I'll show you what are some of the ethics that we need to develop. And this really is where I start bringing it all together, right? All of that stuff I've been talking about, I'm about to bring it together now, just before we end. So in terms of, when I say that an ethical leader is a compassionate leader, what I mean is that by developing compassion in leaders, we are able to develop ethics in them, or ethical values in them as well. I have to show you this. I cannot show you this. All right. There are 4 dimensions, there are 4 ethical dimensions. I spent all this time doing this presentation for you to see the graphics, and then I can't show it to you. Like, that's not even good. That's not even fair, right? There are 4 dimensions of ethics that I want to present to us today, right? It has the ethic of justice, the ethic of care, the ethic of profession, and the ethic of critique. So these are the 4 ethical values that leaders, if we are creating a development program for leaders, these are the 4 ethical values that we need to find a way to embed in this ethical development paradigm. And by training, I am an educational psychologist. So this is coming out of a theory of educational development. So I would have had it there, but I'm going to define it for you and then give you an example. Under the ethic of justice, an ethical leader develops a basic knowledge of laws, of the land, and of Islam. So if we're developing Muslim leaders, they need to have an understanding of the laws of the land in which they live and the basic laws of Islam, which is the basis of their profession, right? They're imams. So they need to understand the laws of Islam and the laws of the land in which they live. Through this, we can delve deeper into abstract concepts such as fairness, equity, situational ethics, morality, and all of these